Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Innovation Matters, your channel for all things tech, innovation, design, and creativity. In this video, we have the privilege to feature a presentation by and conversation with Inge Brokerhof. The topic is stories at work, and you'll hear about how narratives can help us to innovate ourselves and develop our careers. You'll also hear about how stories can benefit immersion and reflection, two vital practices during design. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, without further ado, enjoy Stories at Work with Inge Brokerhof.
So I'll introduce myself. I prepared a cool slide, but it requires a lot of clicks. So I'll just sign to do. Yes. So who am I? Yes, next one. Yeah, so recently, for 1.5 years now, I have my own company. It's called Stories at Work. For this, I do research, I give workshops and training sessions to companies. I also still do freelance teaching at different universities. I give talks and presentations, and I write. Oh yeah, there we go. Already to sort of my academic background. So I first did a multidisciplinary bachelor at UCR, so combined psychology, sociology, and rhetoric. Then I went to Cambridge and I did an MPhil in social and developmental psychology. And there I researched actually the influence of music on thoughts and feelings. So really music then. And then I switched to narratives. In between, I actually worked for a publishing company. So that's also a passion of mine to actually write and edit and stuff. So this was right up my alley. So fictional narratives at work. We're going a bit fast. There's my PhD in the corner. And my PhD is about how stories or fictional narratives influence personal development at work. And with that, I researched a career identity, future work selves, and also moral development. That photo of me is when I obtained my PhD. I defended it, super happy. And the one above, you can see me teaching, because teaching is also really a passion of mine. I set up courses in change rhetoric and politics, business ethics. Also gave diverse workshops like creative writing for academics. And during my PhD, I visited University of Bath in England. And of course, also Harvard Business School for a year. There I did the moral muscle study. I'll tell you more about that later. Yes, super fun. Here you see me at Harvard Business School. And I've also worked as an assistant professor before starting my own company. A little bit about my private life. Oh yeah, still this book came out, Defining Hybrid Heroes. So this is about sort of ambiguous role models we have in fiction, like Dexter Morgan, or Harvey Specter, or Jordan Belfort. But also I reflect a little bit on Trump in the book. This is my family who just popped up. My husband Koen and my son Malte. This was our Christmas photo. That was on a Christmas card. I have hobbies as well. I like to play the guitar and I like to paint. And I always ask when I do a workshop what people's personal role models are. Fictional role models, and mine are Pippi Longstockings and Ronja Robbersdaughter, because they think a little bit out of the box. In the case of Pippi Longstockings, right, just try and yeah, do crazy. And Ronja Robbersdaughter, she is afraid of things, but she actually conquers them. So I feel aligned with them. Ah, I see someone loves Pippi Longstocking as well. Yay. Thank you for that. Yeah, so today I'm going to share some of my research highlights. So how can stories influence work? Also a little bit about teaching with stories. Actually, yeah, they go hand in hand, because I also did research on how you can teach with stories, and narrative research methods, and also give some examples of one method we developed in the Harvard study. Yeah, so this is me with my son when he was, I think, about 6 months. So when we are young, we actually grow up with stories. We read little books with our parents, but also we learn about our culture. Yeah, we are actually surrounded by stories, and for many, many years, this was the main method of sort of transferring information from one generation to the others. So some have called us the storytelling animals. So it's informal stories we share, while having a coffee break at university or maybe after this session, but also books we read, so more formalized, either fictional or real. And of course, also, yeah, I was very interested as well in films and series. So here you can see some fictional narratives about work, some type of work. So you see The Pursuit of Happiness, which of course sells the ultimate story, right, of the American dream. But also Things Fall Apart, which is a fantastic novel about a tribe leader struggling to lead in the colonial times. You have The Circle, of course, which has a lot of also ethical questions. I used The Circle for business ethics as well. It's a great movie. So a lot of examples that I have directly to do with work, but even those who do not have direct, mention of work can be relevant for organizational research. Yes, so my main research themes are about narrative impact on career identity, possible future work self, so who we want to become in the future, and of course moral development, because all stories have some sort of moral component, and yeah, we can really learn from this. So I'll briefly reflect on, for example, career identity. So this is, it's a little bit different from work identity, which is usually linked to a certain job that a person has. Career is more long-term, so it's also more a story in itself. And in order to formulate our career identity, we use a lot of narrative elements, narrative role models. And I've often conceptualized identity with a dialogical selves framework from Hubert Hermans, who says that the self is fragmented. We have all these I positions within us. Those can be roles, for example, me as a researcher, me as a teacher, but also me as a mother, right? You try to combine everything. But also character traits that can sometimes be complete opposites. So me as ambitious, I want to achieve something, but also me as lazy. So you have all these different I positions within you, almost like a society of I positions. And in order to sort of create coherence, to create an identity, in this sense, a career identity, out of that, you try to make sense of it, and you use narrative devices to structure it, to structure the chaos. Yeah, so here you can see one of the models that came out of my research. So we have a narrative experience. So we encounter a story in a book, a movie, or a media story, or a cultural story, folklore, someone we speak to. And then there's sort of three processes that I could uncover, three pathways that can somehow influence career identity. So you have the personal pathway. And then when this is activated, the self is actually extended with a new I position, a new identity position. For example, when someone is viewed by us as a hero or a role model, and we kind of adopt little parts of this person, even your father or mother can be that as well. So you adopt parts of this person into your identity. Then we have the narrative pathway. So this is actually more about story techniques, such as plot and theme and dialogue, and the way we talk about ourselves actually really influenced by the narratives we experience, because those narratives give us words, give us tools, structures to talk about who we are. And therefore you can also see, for example, cultural differences in how we talk about ourselves, which rely on the sort of cultural stories we have grown up with. And then we have the reflective pathway, and that is when a story just, wow, really opens our eyes, and we really start to actively think of who we are and who we want to be. It's perhaps the most rare pathway, but it can really open our eyes. Yeah, you see the citations really long below, but you can look that up later. So the first one, an example that was mentioned was Mulan. She was really seen as a role model by a young professional I interviewed. She was strong. She sort of crossed gender norms and boundaries. But interestingly, another example that was given in the study that I did was the rat from Ratatouille. So you're like, whoa, how could the rat of Ratatouille be your role model? But it actually really makes sense. I don't know if you know this movie, but the rat just really wants to be a chef, and he does everything to achieve this. And yeah, it can be really inspirational for your career. Yes, and here we have some sort of more ambiguous role models. Obviously, Jordan Belfort, a criminal, but yeah, he's portrayed as this hero in The Wolf of Wall Street. And I first did an interview study with business school students, and they really love Jordan Belfort. They mentioned him a lot, and Harvey Specter from Suits as well, who is of course maybe a little bit less, but also quite morally ambiguous. So that kind of triggered us to, or maybe go back one slide. So that triggered us to do an experimental study with The Wolf of Wall Street. So we conducted 3 experiments, and we actually found that he was seen as a role model both by business school students, but also young professionals working in financial sales, which is quite interesting and a little bit troublesome, of course. And we also did, in the second experiment, we tested empathy, and we found that when people were exposed to a narrative from The Wolf of Wall Street, they were less able. So we did the mind in the eyes test. So we're less able to read other people's emotions compared to people who were exposed to a victim narratives of financial malpractice. So that kind of shows that, okay, this narrative is out there, and it's of course presented as really fun and this crazy story, but maybe in business ethics education, it's good to contrast it with other narratives as well, show the other side. Just saying, oh, this person is not doing morally correct things doesn't work, but to portray a story from a different perspective did at least open people's eyes a little bit towards the emotions of others. Yeah, so in the next slide, yeah, so this was really about the narrative pathway. A typical example often found in American research, McAdams does a lot of research on narrative identity, is the redemptive narrative. So you have this sort of struggle, you go through something hard, but in the end, you know, you come out stronger and you survive. If you look at, yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought someone said something. No, so you kind of see this also in like talent shows. Someone saying, oh, my father was janitor, but here I am today, and look at what I've conquered, or I've been ill and now I feel so much better. And you also see that quite a little bit in the Netherlands as well. It's a very dominant way to talk about who you are and to sort of formulate an endpoint of where you are now by the struggles you have been through. And that's also how we make sense. And the final one, yeah, so reflection. So this is, of course, when the story gives you a deeper insight. This often happens when the story is challenging. It doesn't happen maybe when you use a series or movie for escapism purposes. Sometimes it can happen, but often it's, you know, a story that's a little bit different, that opens our eyes for something, expands our horizons. Yeah, you can go one slide on. Oh, yeah, I'll actually reflect on that later. I'll go straight to possible future work selves. So this is Strauss, Griffin, and Parker did a study on this, and they showed that when you have sort of this image of who you want to become, you have this proactive attitude, this actually really helps for achieving your goal. And of course, since narratives, you know, they always have a time component, a cause and effect, a process. So it's really interesting to see what stories can do for your future self. And we did one study, for example, with people who have IBD, so Crohn's disease and colitis ulcerosa, to see what it does to have a story of someone who has the same condition, and if that can sort of help expand their sustainable employability. So sustainable employability is sort of to have this long-term vision for your career, to have hope. And we actually found that a positive story only worked when people felt personally connected to the story. So when they read a story of a fellow patient and they felt personally touched, so it had something they always also wanted, they scored a lot higher on sustainable employability. So this was actually the previous studies were either mixed method or qualitative. This was more of a diehard, sort of my psychological background, qualitative study. Still, we also asked people to write a story in response, and here you can see the example. I see a positive future for myself. I know I have the brain and perseverance to hold a challenging position that mentally demands a lot from me. I am limited by my body to work part-time, but I find it nice to use that extra day off to do something fun. I will never stop learning in my career. PS, and I really like to PS, I took a photo of this as a memory for myself when I'm not doing so well. So here you can see that sharing stories when you have some illness or disorder or disability can be really stimulating, especially when you share them with people with similar dreams who are in some way like-minded. People can really connect, and it can really give them, yeah, as you can see on the photo, more perspective for their futures. And then finally, moral development. So in the beginning of my research, I was really doing this exploratory research, uncovering the pathways, but I got really fascinated by this reflective pathway, and by that sometimes people really felt, wow, this story really opened my eyes. People really felt they had learned through experience when they read a story or saw a really inspiring movie. So I did this study together with Sandra Suture at Harvard Business School. On the next slide. Yeah, and this was about how world literature can be used in the business ethics classroom. And it's a combination you may not immediately expect, but it worked really well. So for 13 weeks, 58 students read one piece of world literature every week. And on purpose, the stories were really, really diverse. So stories from different times, from different cultures. And here you could really see that students had amazing discussions as well about the topics, and discussions that go way beyond a normal business class. They were more emotional. People were really involved. And here we found that actually the outcome on the next slide was the development of moral muscle. This is not a term that we introduced, but it came out of the class discussions. One student brought it up, and then the other started repeating it. And when we asked them, okay, so what is moral muscle? It's moral awareness. So the first step is to recognize in your daily life that there is a moral challenge going on. We often miss that, right? When we go through life quickly. Then it's the day-to-day practice. So with small things, you do think about, okay, who do you want to become? And in the end, you therefore develop a moral character. And of course, it was Harvard Business School, so a lot of the students would go end up in high positions. And previously, before the course, I always thought, okay, so first I have to work my way up in the company, and the moral leadership element will come later when I have power. But when reading all the world literature and all the struggles of the characters, reading about that and having the class discussions, they realized, no, it's not about getting into a high position and then think about ethics. I have to think about ethics today, so that when I end up in a high position, it's already a second nature for me. And one story that really worked well, for example, was Blessed Assurance. And there, a man reflects back on a period before he went to college, and he used to sell funeral insurances to a black neighborhood, a very poor neighborhood, and a lot of immoral things were going on in the company. And later on, he actually started his own laundry business, which is one big metaphor for trying to clean his immoral acts or the feelings that he had about business ethics, or about the job that he had when he was about 19. And then he reflects back on his life, and he still regrets it so many years later. And it really, really touched students on an emotional level, because they could sort of also mentally travel in time to their own futures, right? Maybe right now, big money and status and all these things seem, you know, they are luring, they are so attractive. But if you mentally travel to your own future, you know, what type of life, what type of career do you want to look back on, and what is important then? And those are probably different things when you travel in time. So this was a really cool study to do, and it was amazing to see the effects and to see how personally involved the students were. Yes, and now we go to the next topic. So teaching with stories. I'm sure all of you use stories as an example sometimes in class. And there's actually a lot of ideas around narrative pedagogies. So for example, narratives activate, they stimulate complexity and sense making. Narrative provide immersive learning experience. So there's actually research that shows that when people are really absorbed into a narrative, this stimulates mental processes that are similar, like learning from experience, right? So if you are really into a narrative, you actually experience the world through the character's eyes, and you become a little bit wiser, as if you have lived it. Narratives also evoke emotions. And of course, the last one, narratives constitute identity. And this is also really important for teaching, because you have these dominant narratives, but students all come with their own stories. So you can really touch them if you get a little bit of a grip on that. So I made a slide for each of those, also with some sources, if you like. At the end, there's references, so you can look it up. So yeah, of course, you have the traditional textbook methods, which, you know, they work really well for some courses. But for others, like personal development, coaching, business ethics, you need some alternative teaching methods, right? The more complex a course is, sometimes the more helpful it is to have narratives. So you have the show, don't tell approach. When people hear a story or see a story, they actually have to really actively make sense of what's happening. So this already activates students a lot more. And narratives always have a lens. So this is also really great to also, I just actually finished a big research project on how films can be used for teaching students critical thinking skills. And for this, it's also really useful to think about this lens and think about voice in narratives. And you can also translate that, of course, to politics, which voices are loudest, which are heard most. And maybe some voices are important, but not, you know, you don't hear them as much. So it can broaden people's horizons. And it's part of the constructivist pedagogy. As Fink says, so first you introduce a narrative or a case, and then you introduce theory to apply to that narrative. So it's a very different order of presenting things than it maybe was like 30 years ago. It's also more process oriented, and it can confront us with our own assumptions. So you can give a narrative and then say, hey, but actually, you know, you can surprise students when things are different than they seem in the story. So this is actually the story analysis we used at Harvard. So you have different steps. So for example, you present students with a narrative for business ethics. First, students describe what's going on, then they analyze, then they judge, and then they reflect. And this seems so super easy, but it's really hard, because often we just, skip the first steps and we immediately judge. That's the thing we often immediately jump to. So to first describe what you have read or what you see is often a challenge, and it opens students up to not immediately judge and have this sort of little layer in between judgment. And of course, the reflection is also really good, and also to share experience with other students and to learn that other people interpret the same narrative in a completely different way. And this can also really open students' eyes. And yeah, second, narratives are immersive. So we are storytelling animals, right? Narratives evoke empathy. We can be transported into time. There's an amazing story done about how when we are absorbed into a story, we actually expand the boundaries of self. We don't have to think about ourselves anymore. So we get absorbed in the story, and when we go back, we carry some of the traits of the main characters of the story with us, at least for a little while. So that's amazing. And it's, of course, therefore also often part of experiential teaching, of art-based teaching methods. Like I said before, you have learning from experience. You can apply theory instead of just present it dryly. And stories can also spark moral imagination. So you can visualize moral issues or personal issues in your life, and then already start to almost creatively think of solutions. And if you do that enough with narratives, you get really good at it. Yeah, of course, narratives also evoke emotions. They're personal stories, like Jonathan Haidt says, the emotional dog and its rational tail. We often have these moral intuitions that are strongly tied to our emotions, and they're actually not that rational at all. And it can be really good to explore this with narratives and to get drawn into a story. They're also persuasive because stories often appeal to the triangle of logos, pathos, and ethos. So they draw you in with the emotion. Then logos can give you some information. Of course, ethos make you reflect on who is telling the story. This can also be really problematic, as we can see politically right now, right? Some stories are so persuasive and evoking emotions, and people are not critical. But because of this, it's actually good to use them in education so people can be aware of this emotional impact and can reflect on this. And sometimes narratives can be uncomfortable, and that's actually okay. And that's good to, as a classroom, realize, you don't always have to agree. Sometimes emotions in the classroom are uncomfortable, but in the end, they're really enriching. And of course, a large part of my research as well, and relevant for the classroom, is that narratives constitute identity. They're like mirrors, right? As Aristotle said, they convey personal truths. So you have historia, he says, or facts, and those have the intention to, like theory, to at least try to uncover the truth. But narratives don't necessarily do this. So they convey personal truth, and narrative identity and narrative experience it's an ongoing circle of influence, because we change our identity based on the narratives we experience. And of course, we are the ones making those narratives. And so you have this ongoing circle. And yeah, what else was it? Oh, yeah, you have the dominant master narratives. There's also a body of research on that, and counter narratives. So it's always important, especially as a teacher, to be aware of the counter narratives, of maybe the minority voice and what they could think, and to include that as well. Yes. And then the last part of this, yeah, am I talking maybe a little bit too long? I'm getting a bit tired of hearing my own voice. It's the last segment. Shall I just go on and then we do questions, or do people have questions right now? What's best, Dirk?
I can go either way. Should we put some questions in now after the teaching is probably a good point, and then we can tag on just to break it up a little bit, break the rhythm up. Is everybody okay with that? So I did can you hear me? And it's not so important, but can you see me and hear me right now?
I can hear you. Oh yeah, I see you move from one screen to the other. Yeah, I see you.
Open, if that's okay, I'm gonna open the floor for questions. And what we did, and you don't know this yet, Elise actually put a little item into the form for registration, and our participants, they were able to put into that box if they had a question even before they went into the meeting. So, and I did get one question, and I'm going to relay that on behalf of the participant, if that's okay to get us started. So the question, if I remember correctly, was what, and maybe you have partially touched on this already early in the talk, what was the story that made you interested in narratives? Like what was the sort of the trigger point? Was there a story, a specific story that made it click and put on the light and said, like, this is the route I want to go professionally? Is there such a story in your life?
Oh wow, that's a really nice personal question. I guess I've always been mesmerized by stories since I was a kid. I grew up, my father had a publishing business, my mom was a writer. So stories were sort of in my DNA. And I always used to make up my own stories as a kid. So actually I thought I'd be a writer only. And for me, yeah, sort of the Ronja Roberts' daughter element was really fascinating to see how a fictional character can inspire you and you can relate to this. So yeah, for a while I was also interested, like I said, at Cambridge in doing music research, but then I also used both music and lyrics. So there's also a story element there. So sometimes I could tell you a beautiful story right now, probably making sense of this, like I just did with my DNA, but sometimes you kind of roll in this direction. And when you look back, you're like, oh, this just makes complete sense that I started to do this. But maybe about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I wouldn't have guessed this, even though it was in me. But there, yeah, I truly love stories. I love writing. I like listening to people's stories. I like how we change our identity narratives as we go through life, or even based on our mood. When you feel really down, for example, suddenly, I think that's called emotional contagion in psychology. You can recall all the horrible things that happened to you, right? And if you're not careful, your story gets really negative in the moment. And when you're in a super happy mood, it's really easy to recall your successes and to recreate the story. So it's always ongoing. And right now I would answer it with it's always been in my DNA and I kind of need to do this. But maybe in 15 years I even have more clarity. I don't know.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna, for the questions that came up as you spoke, I'm going to open it up for the room, because there's got to be some benefit for showing up, right? You have first dibs asking questions, and then I'm going to pass it on to the online people. So in the room, do we have questions, comments, reactions? You can say anything to Inge.
I don't have a question, but I would like to comment. Yeah, I totally loved it and can relate so much. I'm a storyteller myself, and like just mentioned that with our mood, even we change the stories, right? I just recently did a workshop with high school students, and I was like, and they were all boys. I was like, okay, how am I going to make them engaged? I did it with mini stories. So I used English literature and business, like real world examples from this, created mini stories for those, and the students were so engaged, they loved it. So yes, it does have an impact. Yeah.
And I as I was reading the article in it beforehand, it made me think of Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk on My Single Story, and like the stories that are written about us, the stories that we write about others, the stories that we write about ourselves, and the complexity of all of that, and developing the moral muscle, how it's making their learning experience a lot more complex, and it's harder, but that harshness and that difficulty also means learning and developing. So it really put that into perspective, and also made me think of Sir Ken Robinson's idea around schools and creativity, that bringing in literature opens up the space for them to figure out not only creative solutions to moral problems, but also possible other moral problems that they could spot. So I really appreciated all of it. Again, it's not necessarily a question that I have, but it just made me think. And then going onwards from, I think, the moral muscle and moral awareness and all of that, if there is a level of like moral literacy that maybe students develop. So I don't know if you can speak to that. Would that be like the next level where you would understand the complexity of things, develop your analytical skills and all of that, but also be aware of what you're doing?
Yeah, I really like the term moral literacy, actually. Beautiful. Yes, that would be ideally the case. And also to be comfortable with complex issues that you cannot immediately solve, right? And sometimes when something's complex, we think, okay, I'm not even going to start, but to still see that it has value, to still think about it and to be aware of this. Yeah, ideally we would have to do a more longitudinal study to see how it lasts. What we do, that's why we use the term moral muscle, what we do envision is that if people keep practicing, keep having this somewhere in their mind, right, keep having this awareness, they will grow this moral muscle, as the MBAs did during the course. But we also had, for example, one participant who was going to back into sort of very diehard Wall Street company, and he said, oh, it's going to be very tough to sort of keep this muscle active. I have to really work for it. So we kind of envision the other way around as well. So maybe if you don't practice your moral muscle, similar as if you stop going to, work out or run or go to the gym, your muscle will deteriorate. So I think that's also possible. And when people get into business environments that only look at the world through a financial glass into profits, then maybe you stop thinking about your own purpose. You get really sort of on that track, right? On just thinking about the financial side, and you lose moral muscle. So yeah, and then when there's a crisis, you may really miss having developed that. And so that's why also we did this time traveling exercise. We gave the example. There's also this example, of course, of in the crisis of 2008, like businessmen committing suicide because they thought their career was based on nothing. Well, if your career is only based on money, and all profit goes down the drain, it's really empty in the end, even though maybe when the game is active, you don't realize it. So to have this deeper layer and your values and moral awareness is something you have to continuously think about.
Yeah, wonderful, like muscle atrophy. Yeah.
Atrophy. That's the word. Yeah.
Actually thinking about that within this piece of the conversation, like I'm more on the creativity side of things. And when we also talk about creative muscle and creative muscle development, and one thing we say to our participants, whether they're students in the classroom or people in industry, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not an expert, but Inge will tell us, if you don't use your moral muscle, you probably lose it just as much, right?
Yeah, that's what we expect based on the findings. Again, we'd have to verify with the longitudinal study. Yeah.
Okay. More questions in the room? No, then we'll hand it over to the online friends. And you can type or you can speak, whatever makes you most comfortable. I'm open for questions, reactions, comments.
We can also go back to questions after the research methods as well.
Well, I have a quick one, if I may throw that in, or do we have someone online?
Yeah.
Gabi, you just turned on your camera. Does that mean we can entertain a reaction?
I have a reaction. I just wanted to share something that I found. I teach a very big course, and it's difficult to get students to it's difficult to hear students' narratives when you've got 350 of them in a room. I do a short reflective writing prompt thing, and I always, in my prompt to them, I incorporate something. Tell me a story about a time that you, whatever, and I've got better at the prompts, which means I've got better from not just getting AI generated things in, but there were a term or two where students were obviously just putting the prompt into AI and giving me what that gave them, and I found it so hard because I wasn't getting those stories from my students, which meant I didn't know who my students were, even more than I don't know who they are already because there's so many of them, and not knowing their experiences or where they come from and what brought them to the room made it really hard for me to know how to locate my teaching and kind of make it really connect with them. So I keep trying to think about how I can keep developing. I share a lot of stories with them, but to use narrative as a way for me to help me get, sorry, words, a way to help me hear from them as well and better understand their experiences so I can teach them better. So that's definitely a challenge with large scale courses as well.
Yeah, I completely that really resonates with me. When you have a large group like that, it's really hard. With the study I mentioned in the US, we had a group of 60, right? So that's way easy. It's still big, but it's easier. In the Netherlands, we had big lecture halls like this, but then we have sort of smaller sessions with 25 people as well on the side. And they're actually way easier to do things with narratives. I have also really tried it in the large lecture halls with giving examples and having people share their stories at least with each other, right? In like little breakouts during college during the lecture. So that really works as well. But yeah, you have to find different ways when the group is really large. And you always have students who may be quiet. So
yeah.
Great. If you want to, Inge, and you know other tips and tricks for scalability come up as we talk, feel free to pepper them in at a later point, because I'm pretty sure that's interesting for everybody. Like anything that will help scalability. We do have a question in the comments. I don't know if you can see it, so I'm just going to read it from Sabine. Thank you so much. And the question is, can you speak to the impact AI has on storytelling and how educators can encourage authentic storytelling? Did that come through?
Yes, that came through. Yeah, it's actually a wonderful topic to discuss, and I think almost every course, but especially also business ethics, right? Because AI sort of is the voice of the majority often. What has been put in often comes out. So to discuss this would be step one: the authenticity and how important it is that we are not the same and that we don't all have the same story, and that AI generated content is generated content based on all these experiences, summarizing it. So yeah, to discuss this in the class is very important, and it can have a value. I've seen good stuff as well, where people are analyzing their own stories with AI to sort of see what the main themes are, almost like a therapy session. So I don't want to dismiss it, but to be aware that it's AI and that it's not human, and that your story is sort of also to celebrate, right, the idiosyncrasy of all the stories that we have. I think that's really important to not just merge them into one dominant narrative of the majority.
So you're confirming that ChatGPT does not have a soul?
No, right now not, and I'm very glad it hasn't. It can be a useful tool, but let's not give it a soul yet. But I would be interested to hear other stories, of course, with it. Yeah.
I had a suspicion that it might not. Anyways, while other people are thinking of questions, can I throw one in quick that I have?
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could give us some insight, partially because you've studied those characters, about what we can learn that is, virtuous in work life from characters like Dexter or Walter White, or as I like to call him, Heisenberg, is there something that we can learn, and how do we extract the good from morally ambiguous characters? Because you've studied this for years. You can probably share some ideas there.
Yeah, and it's really and here the teaching or reflection element is really important. So yeah, I also wrote this book about hybrid heroes, about sort of how we traditionally had heroes that were sort of portraying some ideal of what we wanted to be, and sometimes they had a flaw, but they were never also evil, right? And so the hybrid hero is someone who has some virtuous elements, but at the same time really villainous parts of him or herself as well. You also inventing Anna to just pop in a female example as well, because there's a lot of males here. And yeah, so what you saw with Dexter Morgan, some copycats actually started to murder. There's a case of someone who started to murder in the Dexter Morgan method. So for people who don't know this character, he has conduct disorder, psychopathy, as it was called in the past, and he has an urge to kill, but then he learns from his stepdad to only kill criminals. So criminals who sort of escaped the formal system of justice, because he works at the FBI. So he is a killer with a moral compass. And then the question is, do you want Dexter Morgan in your neighborhood or not? Right? It's a trick question. So these copycats show that if you just watch this movie as some sort of escapism and you start, this is of course, someone's wrong with the person who does that, but if you literally would start to copy that behavior, it'd be really awful for the world if everyone started doing that. But if you take time to reflect on this character and to sort of to activate this reflective pathway and to sort of be honest about your own darker sides, your own darker traits or desires, then it can be really helpful to see yourself more holistically. And then a character is not someone you just want to copy their behavior, but you can really think about who you are with everything you have and who you want to be. And that's we just mentioned authenticity. This can really stimulate sort of to honestly see your ugly sides, or I don't know if you have jealousy or some trauma, or to see yourself as a whole. So these characters can do maybe superficially, also like we saw with the Wolf of Wall Street in the study we did, there's actually also a lot of poor influences they can have on our working lives. But if we take time to consciously reflect on ourselves, then they have virtue. That would be as short as I could hopefully say something meaningful.
Great stuff, great stuff. So maybe time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah.
We're like 5 o'clock is closer than it was a few minutes ago. And
yes.
Maybe with a narrative research method, maybe we can invite like focused questions. Does anybody have any queries about the hallmarks of the narrative research method, or anything specific that interests you that Inge can address at this point? Any specific questions about the research method?
I can also quickly walk through the slide. I think it's only three slides. Maybe we can do that in a few minutes. So to have some repetitions. I can keep it short. So of course, as I said before, narratives focus on processes and experiences, and they can capture social structures like culture, but also individual differences depending on the focus you choose. And they are holistic and embodied. So I had a really nice quote on the next slide, which I liked, about narrative research methods. So they challenge reductionist and mechanistic portrayals of human beings by providing holistic and emotionally rich perspectives. So my background is psychology. So I have done a lot of experimental research, quantitative research. I do love that as well. But this misses something that you can bring in with narratives, right? The richness of lived experience. Yes, and this is maybe an example of a narrative research method. You could also see it in the Academy of Management, Learning and Education paper that's cited here above. So, and I recently used it again when evaluating using film for teaching critical thinking. And here you can have participants, you know, you present them with an empty graph and you have them draw their experience. And instead of sort of saying what's on the y-axis, they can decide what's on the y-axis. So the y-axis is open. And on the, the horizontal line, the x-axis, you have the time element. So in this case, it was 3 different courses, so 3 different examples here. So you have every week what they did, and then they can draw their experiences in either 1 line, multiple lines, blocks. And this really enriched my insight into learning, and also in that, yeah, people learn differently. So in the last study cited below, some students really lit up when they could apply their knowledge in a project, and others were really applying theory. So you could see, you sort of group these narratives together and see that there's not one way of developing and of learning for a student. So I thought this is a really cool way to test this. And of course, when you would do, for example, narrative interviews, you could even leave it completely empty and have people decide on the x-axis, for example, the main chapters of their lives or the main chapters of their career, or if it's an organization, the main chapters of organizations, and then draw out what they think about it and have them label what they draw. It's a short time to explain, but if you have any questions, please get in touch. I'd be super happy. Yeah. Right on time.
Wonderful. Punctual landing. So can we invite any more questions?
I have a
Yes,
quick one.
of course.
Inge, did you consider gender and national or native cultural? Did that factor in the research? And I know it was a small sample, but if not, if that's something that you hope to do, because when you're saying Wolf of Wall Street, I'm like, I wonder how many of those students were female students, you know? Yeah.
Yes, you're very right about that. So we're currently in the 3rd hour now already at Journal of Business Research, and we first had gender in because it was a factor. At least in the empathy study, it was a factor. So the second experiment. Still, women also saw, for some reason, business students saw Jordan Belfort as an example. But yeah, there was a gender effect, and in the end, because of all the revisions and the complexity, we had to cut it. So it is something I'm interested in. Also, native culture and background makes people, of course, approach these narratives from a completely different perspective. So I would love to dive into that as well. Take that into account. And often they are sort of already, if you do a narrative research where people tell their stories. I had one, it's not published yet. I hope to one day, but it's too busy, during COVID. So I had someone interview employees in a supermarket, and you also get all these different narratives, and there you can also see some gender factors and excuse me, some background factors sort of seep in because the narratives are told by people who are different.
Thank you, Inge.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, so I think we're pretty close to 5 o'clock. Thank you so much, everybody in the room, for joining me towards the end of your workday. I know it takes a push to do that, so we really appreciate it. Everybody online, thank you so much for joining us also at the end of your workday. Thank you. We appreciate it. And of course, Inge, thank you for joining us shortly after getting up in the Netherlands. It was really wonderful to welcome you. It's great to see you engage with the UNSW community. We can't thank you enough for the talk. So if you want to congratulate Inge, if you want to interact with Inge, it should be pretty easy. The information is all in the invite that I sent out. But if you're stuck in some way, you can use me as a go-between anytime. Okay, we're friends, so we talk frequently, so it's all good.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Inge.
Thank you so much for having me and for your wonderful questions and amazing.
Thank you so much. We loved it.